Rough around the edges. With that, we should probably get to the final film of the show. The movie is It, Chapter 2.
To the losers.
We made an oath.
Swear?
27 years after the events of It Chapter 1, the Losers Club is grown up and older when they receive a mysterious call from one of their former friends in the town of Derry, Maine, where they're from, telling them to come home because Pennywise the Clown is back and he's looking to kill again. The gang reunites to stop the beast and ultimately find out what's behind the makeup of It and, I don't know, overcome evil through the power of friendship, I guess.
Yeah.
So that's the summary for It Chapter 2. Andy, what did you think of the movie?
So there's a ton to kind of talk about with this. It's a massive thing. It is just short of 3 hours. And I don't know what it's been lately. We've been watching all these 3-hour epics. It is a huge movie. It has a huge cast. It's big in scope. You know, it is running back between two timelines because we get to see some kind of holes filled in from when they're kids and again jumping to their older selves, as well as it's a lot of people to keep up with, and some of the themes are still there. We also have some new ones introduced. We also have plenty of Pennywise. It's a horror movie. We got scares. The kind of mythology of it has to be developed. There is a lot going on here. A lot of it works. A lot of it, I'm not going to say a lot of it. Some of it doesn't. It's not, I don't think it's quite as good as the first film. I think the first film is excellent and it's written really tightly, and it's a great coming of age film. And there's a lot of things that you lose, not for the fault of the film, but just as, I think some things just don't work as well when adults are doing them. But there's a lot to unpack, so let's get into it.
Well, I'm going to be honest. I liked this movie. I didn't like it as much as the first one. And in the age of reboots and sequels and prequels and all kinds of follow-up films, that's probably something you've heard before. But I think this one has a pretty specific reason why, and I want to dig into that. Now, I do think it's important with a horror film, especially one like this, to kind of probably go in fresh, right? Andy, would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so I guess at this point, I'm not going to say we're getting into spoilers, because we don't really do spoilers in this show, but I think for something like this, kind of going in with a rough idea or really no idea of the tone and the mood and what you're about to get into helps the experience. I think hearing our review might tint the glasses, really, for you going in. So if you don't want that, I hate to say stop listening, maybe skip ahead for the end of the show. Otherwise, let's dig into It too, right?
All right.
Not necessarily spoiling the plot, but spoiling our opinions of it. First place to start, I guess, the follow-up, right? We're picking up 27 years after the original. We have a series of characters that are replacing younger characters in the film. What'd you think? The cast.
I mean, this is a great cast. Jessica Chastain, James McAvoy, Bill Hader. You couldn't ask for more. I mean, you'd be lucky to get one of these people, much less all three, and then who they have to fill out the rest of the Losers Club. And we see them kind of falling into similar patterns when we see Eddie, who is the kind of hypochondriac from the first film. He's married a woman that's very similar to his mother. When we meet Jessica Chastain, she's married a man similar to her father. So there's this idea of like cyclical, the kind of cycles of violence that come up. James McAvoy is a writer. He's like working on set. He's famous. He's made it, but he can't figure out how to end a lot of his book. There's a whole criticism out there, which, I mean, he's essentially a foil for Stephen King himself. It's just the same kind of idea. So, but we catch this excellent cast, but kind of in similar situations that they were when we first met them 27 years ago.
Yeah, and I think they're filled out really well. Like you said, Jessica Chastain, James McAvoy, Bill Hader. Did you mention Isaiah Mustafa? He's probably one worth mentioning.
Yes.
Yeah, he plays Mike. He is the guy from the Old Spice commercials.
Yes.
Who I remember hearing about him being cast and thinking, that sounds goofy. But he put on a few pounds for the role. So he's not exactly like husky or anything, but it's a little harder to tell. The mustache is shaved. And he's great in this movie. Jay Ryan is kind of the standout. He's a New Zealand actor who's done a lot of television, and he comes in as Ben in kind of a bait and switch role at the beginning, the kind of the fat chubby kid from the previous film.
Right.
And James Ransone, who plays Eddie, right, he picks up for what was probably the breakout role of the kids in the previous film, the hypochondriac kid who talks really fast. He was previously in Generation Kill. It's the last thing I remember him being in. He's fantastic in this movie, and I doubt he'll get any recognition for it, but man, he picks up that role so great. Like, he's got the energy of that kid, and he talks just like he did, and he's got the same kind of cadence and humor, and like, he does a really good job, I feel like, of being this kind of cowardly man who ultimately has to overcome his fears, right, in a way maybe bigger than most of the other characters, and do well. Bill Skarsgård as Pennywise returns, who's tremendous, just like the previous film. A few other characters kind of scattered throughout, but ultimately, I thought they did a really good job. There were a lot of flashbacks to the kids previous, and they had a lot of the children from the previous films return to film that stuff. They had to do some de-aging on them, because the difference between 12 and 14 for these kids is huge. So they had to kind of do some trickery. But if you haven't seen the film in a year, if you haven't seen the last one, I think it works. I heard some people say, "Oh, it doesn't work at all," and I'm like, "Well, you just saw."
I didn't notice
film.
it. Like,
yeah,
I just
didn't notice.
I just thought they had filmed it at the same time, knowing that they were going to do a sequel.
Yeah, and I think every older version character does a great job of filling the shoes of the younger version character. The only one that stood out to me as odd was James McAvoy, because he kind of adopts a stutter as the film goes on, implying that he's like, I don't know, it's coming back to him being a kid and the stutter he'd gotten over. But like, man, I don't know if it was just watching Split that like might have ruined James McAvoy for me, or like maybe him playing Professor Xavier in the X-Men films, but like, I just can't see. He's just James McAvoy now. I'm just like, oh hey, it's James McAvoy doing it, acting. Look at him acting like a character. Like, Split really ruined me.
I feel like he couldn't get his accent down, his American accent, like, consistent.
No.
It was kind of all over the place.
I remember seeing him in Wanted back in the day and thinking he was like incredible and a breakout star. And now I see him and I'm just like, oh yeah, there's James McAvoy. Like, he's too much of a character actor now or something, and like I can't see through that. And Bill Hader's the same way, but like, Bill Hader's funny and like charismatic, and like, I don't know, it just comes across a little bit better, I guess. So I kind of struggled with that. Let's talk about our kind of setting, right? Derry, 27 years after the previous film. Go ahead.
Right, so we find ourselves coming back to, you know, the gangs getting together, and this interesting thing has happened where they don't really remember anything that's happened. Mike, Isaiah Mustafa's character says, you know, something happens to you when you leave. Everything becomes hazy. You forget what happened when you were here. So he's the only one who remembers everything, and everyone else has pretty much forgotten that summer and that time and what happened. So part of them being there is rediscovering kind of parts of themselves and parts of the town. And there's this whole thing that I read, that part of what Stephen King loves is kind of the mythos of the American small town, of being this kind of a city on a hill, ideal city, but then having like really dark secrets. And in Derry's case, it's, you know, Pennywise, but also things like racism and homophobia, those kinds of kind of more concrete horrors. And then, you know, it is back. It's been confirmed that, you know, more people are missing, and so they have to figure out a way to destroy it. They know that they heard it, but that he's back, and they have to kind of work together to figure out how to destroy it.
Yeah, I like the way Derry is kind of presented in a more modern setting. It opens with a kind of flashback to how Derry was, and then a flash forward to a carnival, and it's much more modern. You can see the technology and everything. Like, this isn't the 80s anymore, it's nowadays. There's a gay couple featured prominently. Like, it's very much like, hey, this isn't the past anymore. This is the future. And they do a pretty good job of presenting that. The problem I had with Derry in this movie is, like, other than the Losers Club, it's, like, empty.
Yeah,
there's
no
like
people.
Nobody in it. And it doesn't make any, like, there's no, like, that's not explained in the film or anything. They just didn't have any extras or something. Like, there was a bit of a feeling of life to Old Derry in the previous film, right? Like, Eddie's mom, right? She was around, and like, the kids had parents. But now that these kids are adults, they don't have anybody to watch them, and they don't have anybody to really answer to. Even the ones with like husbands and wives don't actually have to deal with them throughout the film. And like the characters hang out in this hotel, the Dairy Inn, right? Seemingly nobody runs it.
Yeah,
Every
there's no
scene
one.
they're
There's
in there,
no one there.
There is no staff. Like it's just weird. They go to the library, nobody's there, and like I remember just in the previous film, I was like, there were people at the library. Like maybe this is supposed to be implied that Derry has been somehow like left behind, or maybe all the kids that went missing drove people out of it. But like it's never explained. There's just nobody around, so it just feels kind of empty. I guess that helps to make it feel creepy, but early in the film when they go to a Chinese restaurant, that restaurant's like full of people in Derry. So
Yeah.
why would that make a difference? Did you notice that? Did that bother you at all?
Yeah, I did see that, and I did think that it felt very empty. One thing I wanted to talk about as far as plot that's very different from the first film is we get jumps back and forth in time. We go to 1989 or 1987, whenever it was, and then to the present, and we get some nice gaps filled in. And I thought this was a very cool thing. There's a part in the first movie where the Losers Club gets into it, like a big fight, and then they don't talk to each other for like 4, 5, 6 weeks. And so in this film, we get a filler in of what happened during that time, and how they each kind of still had interactions with it. And I thought that was a really cool, I don't know, technique. It was nice to kind of connect the two films. Some people have complained about this, but I really liked it. I thought it was a really interesting touch.
Yeah, I didn't think it was bad. In fact, if anything, there was some clever filmmaking in the transitions from past to present. Like really clever filmmaking in some spots. I was like, oh, that's a really cool transition. It wasn't just like a jump cut, or wasn't just like a scene change. And there almost never, I think, did it pop up at the bottom with like text saying, you know, Derry 1987 or anything. Like it was just, okay, now you're in the past. Like you could tell by visual storytelling what was on screen. You could see, okay, now we're in the past, now we're in the present. And that was clever. It's got a little bit of that Back to the Future 2 problem where like clearly you guys didn't plan necessarily to have all of these things shot when these kids were young. Like they're older now, so you have to do some de-aging and stuff, but you don't really notice. I didn't anyway. Like it still
I didn't
works.
notice at all.
Yeah. But just like Back to the Future 2, like I wish it had been a little bit more evident in the first film that there was going to be more. I think the first film stands very self-contained because you don't really know there's going to be a sequel till the end unless you've read the book. But like in the second film, these callbacks do make it feel like it has to lean hard on previous work where the first film didn't, and I think that does hurt it ultimately. But
yeah.
that doesn't mean the flashbacks are bad. They're not poor filmmaking. Like they're just different. So yeah, I didn't mind them, I guess.
So another way that this film is way different from the first one seemed a little bit more grounded, you know, like Pennywise was a representation of different horrors in these kids' lives. In this film, it's more kind of supernatural and kind of more in the realm of fantasy. You know, it is like this being entity thing that they have to defeat, and not necessarily a manifestation of their fear, even though that is part of what it feeds off of. And some things that work really well with kids, I think, just don't work well as adults. And I don't think there was a way you could have, because the first film felt so much like, you know, reminded me of things like The Goonies, Stranger Things, you know, that Kids on Bikes, E.T. whole thing. And I feel like that just doesn't work with adults. Like when the kids go, you know, exploring in the caves to find it, you're totally on board and believable. But then when the adults do it, for some reason, it just feels like kind of silly and not as engaging to me.
Yeah. This probably is a great time for me to really drive my point home of why this film doesn't hold up as well as the previous one. You know, I think in the previous film there was definitely an element of mystery, right? I think any good horror film is going to be intimate. I think any good horror film has to take the real world that we know and introduce a new abstract set of rules. Yeah. And our characters, along with the audience, have to figure that out. What is this creepy thing that goes bump in the night? How do we kill it? How does it kill us? Like, you have to learn, right, as you go. That's what's fascinating about a movie like The Thing. You have to figure out how it works. And sometimes you don't. Sometimes that's the mystery, right? But, like, by the end of the first film of It, we have a pretty good idea of what's going on. We have a pretty good idea of how Pennywise works. We don't know for sure, but like we get the whole like feeding on your fear thing. And then in this movie, like you get a return to that, but like we, the audience, kind of know how it works now. And our characters have very conveniently forgotten, which I get was like in the book. Like I get that's not like an extension of the film or anything. That's the way King wrote it, so it is what it is. Like I'm not saying anybody cheated us or anything, but like we know what's up, you know? Like we kind of know how this thing works, and they don't, so they have to kind of relearn it. And for us, it's just like, yep, I'm kind of familiar with this setup. One of them is by themselves, and there's some creepy music. Odds are something crazy is gonna happen. Oh, yeah. It happened. Like, and that's fine. I'm not gonna stand here and say that's bad filmmaking or bad storytelling, but like, you really lose this sense of surprise and suspense that I think is essential to any real horror film because of it. Because we already know it's like season 2 of Stranger Things, right? You know how the Upside Down works already, so it's just not as interesting. Yeah, and that really hurts. Along with the plot, the scares, which we should probably talk about, right? The horror,
right? So the movie definitely does have a ton of scares. Most of them are jump scares, which is fine. Some of them are really good and really well earned. The rest, a lot of them are not, and they're still scary because when stuff jumps out at you, it's scary. But there's some other things, there's some body horror, there's some grossness, there's some claustrophobic things. There's this really pretty incredible scene towards the end involving people being submerged in what looks either like blood or in dirt, and there's this whole I felt very anxious, kind of buried alive kind of situation. So it has kind of a variety of horror, but the majority are definitely jump scares. And speaking of which, there is definitely an homage to both The Thing and, of course, The Shining.
Yeah, there's a few horror homages in here. Keep an eye out. Specifically The Thing. There's almost a shot-for-shot scene with a line spoken by Bill Hader directly out of the scene in The Thing, so keep an eye out for that. Which is good. I'm not saying that was bad. I actually kind of liked it, but yeah, the scares are just a little, they're not quite there, and I don't know if it's because we're dealing with adults now and not kids, and it's scarier for kids or more genuine or what, but and maybe it's because we already kind of know how Pennywise works. We have an idea of what's going on with this thing, but I don't know, they're just a little, the CGI is not that awesome in a lot of them. A lot of the monsters genuinely came off funnier than they were goofy. They look like something out of a Bugs Bunny cartoon in a couple scenes. But it's just not that scary, and the movie isn't. It's not. The jump scares are not as aggressive as they had to be. The music could have been louder. It could have been more of a jump scare, but it's a little bit more scare and less jump. But it's just not that scary. Ultimately, nothing really spooked me. If anything, I was surprised by the humor in the film, in which there is a lot. They give Bill Hader and James Ransone, who plays Eddie's older version, they give them a lot of comedy, room for comedy and laughs, which was surprising.
Yeah, it's funny because I watched a video about how comedy isn't a genre, it's a modifier of film, and it reminded me of this because there are a ton of jokes. There are lots of laughs. There's lots of sight gags. It has more laughs than the average comedy for sure. It does. I do think that kind of hurts it because a lot of times there's a gag during a serious moment, and it kind of gets the Avengers problem where it lessens that seriousness, or it lessens the drama because you're constantly cracking jokes.
Yeah, there's one in particular, I know you're probably already thinking of the one I'm thinking of, that comes right in the middle of the climax of a scare that is a gag for laughs made in the editing room that, it might have been the funniest moment in the film because it comes out of nowhere, but, it's so odd. I don't get why they chose to make that moment funny, and they really didn't have to. I don't know if that was, a test audience thing. It wasn't funny enough. It needs to be funnier or something, but, yeah, this movie mixes in laughs in a way the first film didn't. That really does kind of draw from the suspense a bit. I get it's adults, I get it's older, but it just doesn't quite ring the same way. It doesn't have the same punch. And being a sequel, I get that's a tall order, but I think it was possible, and they just kind of actively chose to not go that way. We don't want this to feel like the first film. We want it to be different, and like, it kind of didn't need to, because the first film worked really well.
Yeah, and also all the CGI kind of, like you said, it hurts some of these scares and makes things. I mean, that's one of the things I thought was so good about the first film, which there's obviously CGI there too, but I felt like they used more like puppetry or practical effects to, where they would twist Pennywise into kind of really twisted contortions and things like that, but he would still look like a person dressed like something that could move and flex like that. Whereas this, you get a bunch of like big CGI monsters that, like you said, look completely fake.
Yeah, and it's a weird. I've really been stuck on this since we saw the film, but it's a weird thing with it, right? Like, because from the second scene in the first film, we get a straight up look at Pennywise's face. Like, whereas in any good slasher film, you really don't get a good look at the bad guy till towards the end, right? You see them behind a mask or something, but with Pennywise, like, they put him right in front of you. He talks, you can see him, he does the weird eye thing. Like, this movie has never tried to hide that, and they could have.
But it was still a while till we saw him, like, in full.
It's true. Yeah. I mean, that's valid, but, like, I mean, the first film opens with a conversation with him that's, like, pretty long. It's, like, a few minutes, him talking to Georgie in the drain, right?
Yeah.
And this movie, like, doesn't quite open the same way, but, like, we just have such a good idea of who our bad guy is, and what he's about, and that he's some kind of mystical, ancient something. This movie gets into it a bit more, but, like, coming off the first film, you pretty much know what's up with Pennywise. You know what to expect. And this one, like, you just don't get the same suspense because you already know, and they could have been inventive and creative and kind of done it a different way, but really they just kind of don't. Like, it's just kind of more of the same.
Well, we were discussing this last night that, in the first film, Pennywise, he manifests these different fears of the children, of loneliness or abuse or, lots of other things. And then this, they kind of abandon that. They don't, because it would be very different what scares adults or what adults fear than what kids fear, and it doesn't really do anything to mock that. It's just kind of the same things. They're scared of the same things. Eddie's still a hypochondriac. Beverly's still scared of abusive men, or or herself. I don't know. The blood thing's weird, but it doesn't. You lose a lot of the magic and the heft from the first film when they are adults, and I'm not sure that there was a way to salvage that.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue maybe detract from the original King story. That might have been the better way to do it. There's a gag in this movie about James McAvoy's character Bill, who's a writer, that is loosely based on Stephen King, and the whole bit is that he can't write a good ending, which is something Stephen King has struggled with for years. That's been a huge criticism of his work, so it's kind of funny that that's a nod in here. But, I mean, this movie really almost doubles down on that in a weird way. In a way that's, like, unironic. It's not particularly, like, coincidental or charming. But, yeah, like, this movie has a big lean on mysticism and kind of explaining where Pennywise came from, but it just feels out of place. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, and it feels clumsy. The characters all having conveniently forgotten the events of the first film is like some soap opera amnesia stuff, like stupid and really did not need to be done that way. And it just feels like a lot of the plot conveniences are just that, conveniences, because it would have been harder or more complicated to tell it in a different way. And I get you're going off a book, but like, this is, it's not a book, it's a movie. Like, you should maybe not be afraid to adapt the work and kind of change it up and make it work better.
For film, yeah.
For screen,
The mysticism just does come out of nowhere. Like, it's, you have this whole thing with, like, it reminds me of The Shining, Indian burial ground, sacred.
Indian burial ground,
Indian people that happen to know everything that no one else does. And I feel that you lose so much from the first film where Pennywise, like I said, is a manifestation of your fear, and then when you kind of add too much to his backstory and his mythos, and you lose what you said he was originally.
Something I'm interested to see, just kind of as we're wrapping things up here, the runtime, 2 hours and 50 minutes. I'm going to be honest, I felt like it was that long because the first one was that long. This one did not need to be that long. It could have easily
The first
been
one's
shorter.
not that long though.
Is it not?
No, I thought it was over 2 hours, but not like a way over
Hold
2
on.
hours. I'm gonna look it up.
Yeah, I thought the first one was at least 2.5. I gotta get to
2 hours. 2 hours 15 minutes.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Oh
So
my god.
It's a much tighter film.
Yeah, and it works better. And this one's very long for really no reason. They could have tightened up a lot. At one point, about an hour in, I was bored, and I got up, went to the bathroom, and then while I was out there, I thought, you know what, I should go get my jacket out of my car. Went outside, and I never do this during movies, man. I don't even get up to go to the bathroom during movies. But went outside, got my jacket, came back in, checked my ticket back in, sent a text on my phone, walked back in. It was like I missed nothing. The characters were in the same place, and seemingly no information had been conveyed. I was like, man, it's like I didn't even leave. I feel like there's more than a handful of scenes in this movie that are that way. Like, it just didn't need to be in there. It doesn't make any sense. So, and I wanted to see, while I'm on my soapbox here, I wanted to see, like, the mythos of Pennywise grow in an interesting, unique, kind of strange, enticing way. And it just kind of doesn't. Like, the way they expand who he is, like, is really dull.
Yeah. And like I said, even though I like the flashbacks, you essentially could have cut all the stuff all the young stuff it's cool, but I would have much rather focused on the adult characters, which I think is what's really different in the first film. Like, the characters of each of the kids is really the focus, whereas this, you lose a lot of that because you got to make sure you see Pennywise.
It does make me wonder how much of this comes from I really shouldn't probably call this out, but the writers on this film are different. Because the screenplay in the first was written by Chase Palmer and a guy named Kari Joji Fukunaga, who wrote True Detective. Yeah, he was not present for this film, and I just can't help but wonder, what that changes. Like, I don't know if he wrote all the screenplay for the first one or a little bit, but man, I remember he was working on that one for a while, and then this one he's completely absent from the writing, and it's just different, and I'm not sure what that means, but that's just ultimately what it feels like. Like, it's still good, and I'm so glad I saw it, but like, it's just got problems, Yeah,
it does.
One other thing while I'm thinking about it, this movie is distributed by Warner Brothers, as is Dr. Sleep, which is coming out, the sequel to The Shining. Stephen King is in this film in a cameo role. Mm-hmm. And Warner Brothers imagery is featured prominently in the first act when our man Bill Denbrough, who's a writer, is on a Warner Brothers set lot with multiple Warner Brothers like logos in the film. I got a theory. I bet Stephen King shows up in Dr. Sleep as a cameo. I would bet.
Someone said he's the new Stan Lee.
He's the new Stan Lee. Yep, I heard that and I was like, I absolutely believe that's happening. Both of these films are made by Warner Brothers. Why wouldn't they get him to show up in both? Sure, they're going to make him the new Stephen King-averse. It's time. It's time.
That's right.
Any other thoughts before we wrap up?
I think we're ready to go.
Andy, would you recommend It Chapter 2?
Yes, with some caveats. If you're a big fan of Stephen King and of the first film, I think you got to see it and see how it ends. It definitely has its problems. It does a lot of things really well. It's got a great cast. It's really funny. It does have a lot of scares. That's what you want out of a horror movie. It's not as tight. It's too long. It doesn't have kind of what I felt was kind of deeper themes that the first film had. This one just kind of picks up where the last one left off, but then doesn't go anywhere with it. And like I said, it's too long. I may have already said that. But overall, I would recommend it. It is really violent. There is gore. It is rated R. So if you're squeamish about any of those things, I would pass. But generally recommend.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat. I would recommend it, especially if you saw the first film and you liked it. It punches the clock. It accomplishes what it's supposed to accomplish, but like ultimately, it's just not as good. And like, that bums me out. It's not, it's okay. They keep making Marvel movies and those aren't all as good as the previous one. Like, sometimes they're worse, it's okay. I just wish this one had a little bit tighter of a conclusion. The first one felt so good, and part of that was because it was self-contained, and this one just can't be. It has to build on what came before, and ultimately I think that hurts it. It could have been better. It certainly could have been worse. Ultimately, I would recommend it, but, a word of caution, I guess.